George, Ocean Explorer. Today, the bathtub has become the deep Atlantic Ocean. George is preparing for a grand expedition. George is the brave captain. He brought his best crew member, Mr. Dinosaur. They dive down into the deep sea. They are searching for lost treasure. They swim past the coral reefs. That's the soap bubbles. Look, George found a strange sea creature, Mr. Duck. Aha! Mr. Dinosaur meets a friendly giant. A huge whale is spraying water into the air. What a wonderful sight at the bottom of the ocean! It's time to return to dry land. George had such a wonderful ocean adventure. Goodbye, sea! Peppa Pig and the Little Round Ball. In front of Peppa's house, with gentle sunshine, a small round ball slowly rolls into the yard. Peppa stands and looks, tilting her head curiously. George sits behind, watching the ball. Peppa bends down and gently pushes the ball with her hand. The ball rolls toward George. George happily stands up. George kicks the ball a little too hard, and the ball rolls faster. The ball rolls past Peppa, and Peppa runs after it. From a distance, Daddy Pig watches. Peppa stops the ball. Peppa gently kicks the ball toward George. George catches the ball and laughs loudly. Daddy Pig appears, and the whole family laughs happily. Snowman making. This morning, Peppa wakes up to find the garden covered in white snow. A perfect day for building snowmen awaits her. Peppa and George roll huge snowballs with Daddy Pig. George adds a carrot nose to the snowman, while Peppa laughs with delight. The snowman is almost ready. Peppa decorates the eyes with coal, adds a hat, and George sticks branches for arms. What a wonderful creation! After finishing the snowman, Peppa and George throw snowballs and play around it. The whole family's laughter echoes across the snowy yard. A wonderful day with the snowman comes to an end. Peppa and her family will always remember these fun and happy moments. One beautiful morning, Little Pig and Little Pig were walking in the garden. Little Pig suddenly discovered a big rock. But the strange thing was, this rock could move. The curious Little Pig approached the rock, and in the blink of an eye, the rock started rolling, as if it wanted to lead the Little Pig somewhere. The stone led Little Pig into a mysterious area of the garden, where there was a small gate covered with wildflowers. The gate seemed never to have been opened. As they passed through the mysterious gate, Little Pig and Sister Pig enter a magical garden, a vast flower garden, and a giant candy garden. So the adventure ends, but this mysterious garden will surely have many interesting things waiting for Little Pig and Sister Pig to discover. Who knows where this stone will lead them next? It's a beautiful day, and Peppa and George go to the park with Daddy Pig, bringing along their colorful new kite. Daddy Pig excitedly runs as fast as he can to make the kite fly high. But Daddy Pig suddenly trips over a rock. The kite still soars up high, but then gets stuck on the statue's ear in the park. Peppa and George look up, both surprised and giggling. A strong gust of wind blows through, pulling the kite down and covering Daddy Pig's head. He stumbles around blindly, while Peppa and George burst into fits of giggles. What was supposed to be a simple trip to the park turns into an unexpected comedy show. The wind blows stronger. making the kite slip right out of Daddy Pig's hand and swirl around in the sky. Peppa and George run after it, giggling and reaching up to catch it. Daddy Pig hurries along too, but quickly becomes out of breath.
Peppa and the hamburger. Peppa sits on a picnic blanket with a basket beside her. Peppa opens the basket and takes out a hamburger. Peppa looks at the sandwich happily. George stands nearby and looks at the sandwich. Peppa holds the hamburger, about to eat. Suddenly, Peppa drops the sandwich onto the blanket. Peppa looks at the hamburger in surprise. George bends down and looks at the hamburger. Peppa picks up the hamburger. Peppa gives the hamburger to George. George holds the piece and smiles. Peppa takes another hamburger from the basket for herself. Then they eat the hamburger. Peppa stands up after eating. They run around the yard and laugh.
Peppa and George are playing with a balloon in the park. A strong gust of wind blows the balloon up into the sky. Peppa looks up at the balloon, startled. George points at the sky, following the balloon with his eyes. Peppa and Daddy Pig start running after the balloon, trying to keep up as it flies higher. Peppa and Daddy Pig run across the grassy field, their legs moving quickly. George runs behind, watching the balloon and smiling. Peppa and Daddy Pig spot the balloon caught in a tree branch. Peppa points at the tree, excited to see the balloon. Daddy Pig uses a long stick to try and reach the balloon from the tree. Peppa hops around happily. Peppa and Daddy Pig are happy to have rescued the balloon. Peppa holds the balloon in her hands, smiling. George jumps up joyfully. The pig family sits down together and continues to play in the park. Rainbow surprise! The rain has stopped. The sky is clear and everything sparkles in the sunshine. Peppa and George rush into the garden, hopping on the wet grass. The air feels fresh and lovely.
Whoa!
Look! A colorful rainbow lights up the sky after the rain.
Yippee!
George shouts with joy, while Peppa runs around as if she could touch the sparkling colors. Peppa and George skipped around an imaginary rainbow. The whole family stood together, watching the rainbow from afar. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the scenery was colorful. Peppa realizes that after every rain, there's something wonderful to see. A rainbow full of colors. Peppa Pig and Daddy Pig's hat. Daddy Pig sits on a chair in the garden, wearing his familiar hat and holding a glass of water. Peppa and George are playing with a ball nearby. Daddy Pig stands up to water the plants and accidentally leaves his hat on the chair. A gentle breeze blows by and the hat gently wobbles. Peppa sees the hat and walks over curiously.
Huh?
Peppa tries on the hat. It's too big and covers her eyes. George giggles. A stronger gust of wind blows through. The hat flies off Peppa's head. Peppa and George run after the hat. The hat lands right in front of Daddy Pig. Daddy Pig bends down, picks up the hat, and puts it back on his head. Peppa and George run over, see Daddy Pig wearing his hat, and laugh loudly. Peppa Pig and the Underwater Adventure. Today, Peppa and her family are going to explore the underwater world. A colorful adventure full of strange and wonderful sea creatures awaits them. Wow! Peppa is ready to dive into the sea. She can't wait any longer. But will Peppa find some fascinating sea creatures down there?
Aha!
Amazing! Brightly colored fish are swimming all around Peppa and George. But wait, what's that? A giant whale is coming closer. What a surprise! How beautiful! The colorful coral reefs are full of tiny crabs and starfish. Peppa finds a little crab playing with a shiny shell. She feels like she's in a whole new world. The underwater adventure is coming to an end. Peppa and George are so happy to have discovered a magical world beneath the sea. But they know there's still so much more to explore. What a wonderful day it's been! Peppa and her family will always remember their amazing underwater adventure. And who knows, maybe next time, another adventure awaits. Today, Peppa and George are going to visit your different houses in class. They are so excited to see what kind of houses you live in. The first house they came to was Ket's. It was small and colorful. Peppa and George both loved it immediately. Scowl's house is different. It's tall and modern, with big windows looking out onto the garden. Peppa and George love it because it's so spacious. Bear's house is located in the forest and is made of wood. This is Peppa and George's favorite house because it is close to nature and has a beautiful garden. After the tour, Peppa and her friends sat down and realized that each house had its own special thing. Peppa and the Little Umbrella House. Peppa walks into the garden and sees an umbrella lying on the grass. Peppa curiously walks closer. Peppa presses the button and the umbrella pops open. Peppa is slightly startled, then smiles happily. George hears the sound, runs over, and looks at the open umbrella.
Whoa!
Peppa slowly lowers the umbrella to the floor. Peppa gently pats the floor to signal George. George crawls under with her. A gentle breeze makes the umbrella tilt slightly. The two siblings try to steady the swaying umbrella. The umbrella becomes steady again. Peppa and George look at each other in relief. They both laugh happily. Peppa and the Little Picnic. Peppa holds a small basket and looks around the grass. Peppa spreads the picnic blanket on the ground. George runs over, carrying a toy food box. Peppa smiles happily. Peppa sits down and puts the food on the blanket. Peppa pretends to eat and nods happily. George copies her and pretends to eat too. They both laugh together. Peppa lies on her back and looks up at the sky. George lies down next to Peppa. They watch the clouds slowly drifting by. Peppa and George smile and relax. Peppa Pig and the ripe apple tree. Peppa spots the apple tree, heavy with ripe red apples. She bounces up and down, reaching as high as she can. But the apples sway teasingly above her, just out of reach. George grabs the tree trunk and shakes it with all his strength. A few apples tumble down with a satisfying thud, but instead of landing in their hands, the apples roll, roll, roll far away. Peppa and George scramble after them, completely out of breath. Exhausted, the two sit under the tree, ready to give up. Suddenly, a gust of wind shakes the branches. one shiny apple drops straight down, rolling right to Peppa's feet. George picks it up proudly, holding it like treasure. Peppa giggles. The two share the apple, munching happily under the trees. Peppa learns numbers. Today, Peppa and George are learning about numbers. They see numbers on blocks and toys around them. Peppa sees the number 1 and says, "This is number 1. There is only one." George laughs and nods in agreement. Peppa and George see 2 balls on the ground. Peppa says, "This is number 2. There are 2 balls." They count together. 1, 2. Peppa sees 3 chairs and says, "This is number 3. There are 3 chairs." George counts along with Peppa. 1, 2, 3. Finally, Peppa and George learn the numbers from 1 to 5. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig are very proud of the children for learning their numbers. Recognize colors. Today, Mummy Pig is going to teach Peppa and George to recognize colors. She brings out a color chart and starts explaining to them. Peppa points at the red apple and says, "This is red just like this apple." George looks at it and says, "Red is so nice." Peppa sees the fresh green trees in the garden and says, "This is green, just like the leaves on the trees." Peppa points at the bright yellow sunflower and says, "This is yellow, just like this sunflower." Peppa looks up at the sky and says, "This is blue, just like the sky." Peppa and George are happy that they've learned the colors. They feel proud to recognize red, green, yellow, and blue in the world around them. Little Pig and Big Pig were walking in the park when they suddenly heard a strange sound coming from behind the bushes. They both stopped and looked at each other curiously. Little Pig started to guess. Could it be a giant bear sleeping in there? And Sister Pig thought, or maybe a squirrel looking for food. The rustling from the bushes grew louder. Neither of them could figure out, what was it? Could it be a monster? And then, suddenly, Daddy Pig jumped out from the bushes, scaring Little Pig and Sister Pig out of their wits. It turned out that Daddy Pig was playing hide and seek. After a moment of panic, the whole pig family laughed out loud. It turned out that the strange thing behind the bush was a fun game that Father Pig thought up. Peppa and the leaf on her head. Peppa walks slowly in the garden. A leaf falls down from above. The leaf gently lands on Peppa's head. Peppa doesn't notice and keeps walking. Peppa stops and looks around. The leaf on the head gently wiggles in the breeze. George runs over and looks at Peppa's head. George points and giggles. Peppa reaches up to her head, but can't quite reach it. The leaf falls into Peppa's hand. A gentle breeze blows. The leaf blows away from Peppa's hand. Peppa and George watch it fly away and smile. The leaf swirls gently and falls to the ground. Peppa picks up the leaf and places it on George's head. George stays still for a moment, then smiles. Peppa laughs happily. Peppa and the puddle. After the rain, the garden is still wet. Peppa walks outside and strolls on the grass. Peppa suddenly notices a small puddle on the path. Peppa stops and bends down to look. Peppa jumps into the puddle. Water splashes around. Peppa looks at the puddle and smiles happily. Peppa jumps again. George George plays with a leaf and sees Peppa splashing. George looks down at the puddle. George jumps in with Peppa. The two siblings jump in the puddle and laugh happily. Peppa Pig and the ball rolling in the wind. The ball lies still on the grass. A gentle breeze blows. The ball slowly rolls away, even though no one touches it. Peppa widens her eyes and tilts her head as she watches. Peppa walks after the ball. Without running fast, the ball rolls slowly, changing direction with the wind. George runs over and points at the ball. Just in time, Peppa catches up too. Peppa gently places her foot on the ball. Peppa gently kicks the ball over to George. George gently kicks the ball back to Peppa. Peppa kicks the ball too hard, and it flies up. Peppa and George run after the ball. Peppa hugs the ball in her arms. Peppa turns to George and smiles happily. Bubble blowing contest. Today, there's a special event at school, the balloon blowing contest. Madaman explains the rules. Everyone gets one balloon, and whoever blows the biggest balloon without popping it wins. The children are excited. Everyone wants to win the contest. The contest begins, but blowing balloons isn't as easy as it looks. Some little accidents make everyone laugh out loud. In the end, only Peppa and Susie are left with their balloons. Who will be the winner? Susie wins, but Peppa is happy too. The balloon blowing contest has brought lots of fun and laughter to everyone. Peppa learns about independence. Today, Mummy Pig gives Peppa and George some house chores. Peppa will fold the clothes, and George will help Mummy Pig clean up. Peppa starts folding the clothes, but everything turns out not quite as she expected. The clothes get tangled and aren't as neat as Peppa thought. Peppa decides to clean the furniture in the living room, but instead of cleaning everything, she only wipes a little and leaves some dust behind. Mummy Pig sees Peppa struggling, so she helps her complete the chores. Mummy Pig shows Peppa how to fold clothes neatly and clean the furniture properly. In the end, Peppa and George finish their chores. Peppa feels proud because she has learned how to be independent and do housework properly. Peppa Pig and the shape-shifting cloud. Peppa and George sit on the grass in the garden. High above, white clouds drift slowly across the blue sky. George points up at the sky, excited. Peppa squints as she watches a big cloud drifting by. Daddy Pig sits nearby, holding a cup of water, and looks up at the two children. Mummy Pig sits beside them, smiling gently. The cloud slowly turns into the shape of a chubby little pig. Peppa jumps up excitedly and points at the sky. A moment later, the cloud stretches out and turns into the shape of a dinosaur. George's eyes light up, and he jumps up happily. The cloud slowly breaks apart into many small pieces and drifts away. Peppa and George laugh happily. One morning, Peppa wakes up and looks around her room. Toys are scattered all over the floor. Books lie in a messy pile on the desk, and the blanket and pillows are all over the bed. Peppa puts her hands on her hips, sighs, but decides she will turn her messy room into a tidy, cozy place. Peppa starts picking up each toy, sorting them by shape and color, then placing them into different boxes. One for cars, one for stuffed animals, and one for building blocks. Each time she closes a lid, she stacks the boxes neatly against the wall. Peppa folds her blanket carefully, smoothing out each corner. While folding, a big teddy bear hidden inside the blanket falls to the floor. Peppa giggles, hugs the bear for a moment, then places it neatly at the head of the bed, right next to her favorite pillow. After dusting the desk and arranging the books neatly, Peppa steps back to look at the whole room. Everything is clean and tidy. The floor is clear and shiny. Peppa lies down on the bed, hugs her teddy bear, and enjoys the cozy feeling of her freshly cleaned room. Peppa Pig and the Mysterious Footprints. Peppa and George are running and playing when Peppa suddenly stops and looks down at the ground. On the grass, small round footprints appear, forming a line. George curiously bends down to take a closer look, his eyes wide with wonder. Daddy Pig is watering the plants nearby and hasn't noticed yet. Peppa signals to George, and the two of them follow the footprints. Mummy Pig appears, holding a basket, and smiles when she sees the two children crouching down. The footprints lead to a small puddle in the garden. Peppa and George look around, feeling a little surprised. Peppa and George look down, then look at Daddy Pig. Peppa realizes the footprints are Daddy Pig's, from when he watered the garden earlier. It ends with Peppa and George laughing happily. George plants a flower. Today, George has a very special plan. He's going to plant a beautiful flower right in the garden. George starts digging a hole for his seed, but oh no! The dirt is flying everywhere! Then George gently places the seed, covers it with soil, and gives it a careful drink of water. Such a hard-working little pig! Days go by, and George keeps watching his garden spot. Every morning, every evening, but still, nothing yet. And then, look! A tiny flower has bloomed in the sunshine. George's eyes light up, and he jumps for joy. Yahoo! George has learned something wonderful. When you care and wait patiently, beautiful things will bloom. Peppa and Two Leaves. Peppa walks around the garden. Peppa sees two leaves lying on the grass. One leaf is big and one leaf is small. Peppa picks up the big leaf and looks at it closely. Peppa picks up the small leaf with her other hand. Peppa compares the two leaves. Peppa puts the two leaves on the ground. A gentle breeze blows by. The small leaf starts rolling across the grass. Peppa is surprised and runs after the leaf. George runs over. The leaf stops at his feet. At the same time, Peppa runs up just in time. Peppa picks up both leaves again. Peppa tosses the two leaves into the air. The two leaves spin and float down slowly. Peppa and George raise their hands to catch the leaves. One leaf lands on George's head. Peppa sees it and laughs happily. George laughs too. Peppa Pig and the Blooming Flower. Peppa and the little bell. Peppa walks into the room. Peppa sees a small bell lying on the table. Peppa moves closer. Peppa looks carefully at the bell. Peppa touches the bell, and it rings softly. Peppa opens her eyes wide and smiles. Peppa picks up the bell. Peppa rings the bell, and it goes ding ding. Peppa looks at the bell and smiles happily. George hears the sound and runs in. George looks at the bell curiously. Peppa gives the bell to George. George holds the bell and gently rings it. The bell makes a cheerful sound. Peppa and George look at each other and smile happily. Today, Maria and George have found an old car tire in the garden. It's round and shiny black, looking rather mysterious. Maria has an idea. Let's roll it. So the two begin pushing the tire around the garden, giggling as it wobbles along. But, oh dear, the tire suddenly rolls away, right down the little slope outside. Maria and George gasp and chase after it. Their tiny feet scramble as fast as they can, dust flying everywhere, while the tire rolls faster and faster and faster. The tire bounces straight into the vegetable patch. Thump! A carrot shoots into the air. Whoosh! Lettuces tumble all over the ground. Daddy Pig, who was watering the plants, looks up in surprise. He rubs his eyes in disbelief. A naughty tire is wrecking the whole garden. Daddy Pig hurries over, ready to scold them. But when he sees Maria and George laughing loudly in the puddle, he can't help but laugh too. Mud sprays everywhere. Their clothes are filthy, but everyone is happy. For Maria and George, even an old car tire can turn into the best game ever. Today, the school is holding a running competition. Peppa, George, and the others are very excited to participate. Who will be the winner? The whistle has blown! The race is officially on! Peppa and George and their friends run as fast as they can. Oh no! There are many obstacles on the track. Peppa has to overcome them, but George can't stop because he tripped over a small rock. Daddy Pig and Mummy Pig cheered enthusiastically, which gave Peppa and George extra motivation to continue the competition. And finally, Peppa and her friends finished the competition. Even though she wasn't the winner, Peppa felt very happy because she tried her best. Peppa and the apple on the high table. A red apple sits on a tall table. Ooh.
Aha!
2 hours later.
Little Pig and his sister decided to explore a forest that was said to have many strange things. But no one expected that. Today would be a special adventure. As they went deeper into the forest, they came across a giant tree, standing tall in the middle of the road. But not any ordinary tree. Suddenly, a mysterious warning rang out from within the tree. Be careful, darkness is approaching, and things will never be the same again. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The shadows of the trees began to move, but it wasn't the wind. Little Pig and Sister Pig ran faster, but the darkness seemed to be unyielding. And in the end, nothing strange happened. Everything was in the sisters' imagination. Peppa and the colorful balloons. Peppa walks into the garden and sees a bunch of colorful balloons. Peppa opens her eyes wide and runs closer. George runs after her, looking curiously at the balloons. Peppa gently touches the balloons. George points at the blue balloon and smiles. Peppa gives one balloon to George. George hugs the balloon and runs around. Peppa throws a balloon into the air. Peppa and George look up, surprised. Daddy Pig comes out and sees the balloons floating high. Daddy Pig holds the balloon strings tightly. Peppa and George jump up happily. Peppa and George play together with a bunch of colorful balloons. The whole family laughs happily.
Peppa and the Flying Hat. Peppa walks into the yard and sees a hat on the grass. Peppa walks closer and picks up the hat. Peppa puts the hat on and smiles happily. George is playing with a ball nearby when he sees Peppa and the hat. A gentle breeze blows by. The hat on Peppa's head is blown into the air. Peppa watches the flying hat in surprise. The hat floats and lands farther away. Peppa runs after the hat. George runs after her. The hat rolls on the grass and stops. Peppa picks up the hat. They look at each other and laugh happily. Peppa and George play with a paper airplane. Peppa sits in the living room with a paper. Peppa folds the paper into a paper airplane. Peppa holds the airplane and looks at it happily. George stands nearby and curiously looks at the airplane. Peppa gives George a paper airplane. They stand side by side holding their airplanes. Peppa throws her airplane first. George throws his airplane into the air. The two airplanes glide through the air. One airplane circles and lands on the grass. Peppa and George run after the airplanes. George picks up the airplane and gives it to Peppa. They look at each other and laugh happily.
The pig family arrives at a farm to try being farmers for the day. We're going to be farmers and take care of the plants, Peppa says. Everyone gets ready to start working on the farm. Peppa and George start watering the plants. I'm going to water the plants so they can grow big and strong, Peppa says. George helps his sister by watering around the garden. Peppa and George begin to pick ripe tomatoes from the garden. Look, our tomatoes are ready, Peppa says. The pig family continues to pick vegetables and put them in their baskets. After a hard day's work on the farm, the pig family sits down to enjoy the vegetables they just picked. We can eat what we've grown with our own hands, Daddy Pig says. Everyone enjoys a meal and feels proud of their hard work. After a hard day's work, the pig family sits down to rest. Being a farmer is fun, but I like playing more, Peppa says. Daddy Pig laughs and says, helping on the farm is good, but playing is fun too. The whole family laughs and feels proud of their work. Peppa in the blue raincoat. It starts raining heavily outside. Peppa stands by the door and watches the rain. Mummy Pig comes out and gives Peppa a raincoat. Peppa walks over and puts on the raincoat.
2 hours later.
Peppa walks outside, wearing the blue raincoat. Peppa holds out her hand to catch the raindrops. Peppa sees a small puddle on the ground. Peppa jumps lightly into the puddle. George runs outside and sees Peppa jumping in the puddle. George looks at Peppa's blue raincoat. Peppa jumps again and water splashes around. The two siblings laugh happily in the light rain. Peppa Pig and the Wandering Leaf. Peppa and George are playing in the garden.
Yahoo!
Daddy Pig is standing nearby, watering the flowers. A yellow leaf gently falls down in front of Peppa. A gust of wind blows past. A yellow leaf gently falls in front of Peppa. Peppa runs after it, with George toddling along behind her. Daddy Pig looks up and watches. The leaf floats past Daddy Pig and then lands on his head. Daddy Pig is startled. Daddy Pig smiles as the leaf gently falls down beside Peppa. Peppa holds the leaf while George stands beside her happily. All three of them look at the leaf and they all burst out laughing. Peppa Pig and Tidy Up Day. Peppa and George's room. Toys are scattered all over the floor. Teddy bears, balls, and building blocks. Peppa looks around the room, a little surprised. George sits among the toys, happily playing. Mummy Pig walks in smiling. Mummy Pig hands a toy box to Peppa. Peppa picks up a teddy bear and puts it into the box. George picks up a ball, but it rolls away. Daddy Pig comes in from outside.
Aha!
Daddy Pig picks up the ball and hands it back to George. George smiles happily. Peppa and the small toy car. Peppa walks into the living room slowly. Peppa stops when she sees a small toy car on the floor.
Whoa!
Peppa sits down and gently touches the car. The car rolls slowly. Peppa opens her eyes wide and smiles. Peppa places her hand behind the car. Peppa gently pushes the car forward. The car rolls across the floor. Peppa runs after the car. The car stops near George. George looks at the car curiously. George touches the car. George pushes the car back toward Peppa. Peppa catches the car with both hands. Peppa and George laugh happily. Peppa and the rolling balloon. Peppa walks into the living room. A small toy car lies on the floor. Peppa sees the toy car and gets an idea.
2 hours later.
Peppa holds a balloon. Peppa ties the balloon string to the back of the toy car. Peppa gently pushes the car. The car rolls slowly. The balloon sways behind. Peppa opens her eyes wide with delight. George runs into the room. George sees the toy car rolling. George lightly taps the car. The car rolls faster on the floor. The car rolls around the living room. Peppa and George run after the car.
Yahoo!
After catching the car, they look at each other and laugh happily. It was a bright, breezy morning in Peppa's backyard. As Peppa wandered around, she spotted a colorful umbrella lying forgotten in the corner of the garden. Peppa curiously picked it up, wondering what fun she could have with it. Suddenly, a big gust of wind blew. The umbrella opened wide, lifting Peppa off the ground. She squealed in surprise. Up in the sky, Peppa floated and twirled like a pink bird with a rainbow wing. The wind carried her over the yard, spinning in circles, dipping and soaring. Down below, Mummy Pig, Daddy Pig, and George gasped, then burst into laughter as they watched Peppa's unexpected flight show. The wind slowed down, and Peppa landed gently on the soft grass. Her family rushed over as Peppa waved with a big smile. Peppa Pig and the Opening Box. Peppa and George are playing in the living room. In the corner of the room, there's a small cardboard box with its lid slightly open. Daddy Pig is sitting on a chair, and Mummy Pig is sitting beside him. Peppa bends down to look inside the box. George is also curious and leans closer to the box. The box shakes slightly, making both of them jump in surprise. Peppa opens the box completely. Daddy Pig sees it from a distance, so he walks over and leans in to look inside. Inside are a few toys. Peppa holds the toy, and George jumps up excitedly. Daddy Pig and Mummy Pig smile. The empty box lies still on the floor.
Peppa and 2 balls. Peppa walks into the yard and sees 2 balls, one red and one blue on the grass. Peppa looks at the 2 balls and smiles happily. A gentle breeze blows and one ball starts rolling away. Peppa watches the rolling ball in surprise. George runs over and sees the other ball. George kicks the ball and it rolls away. Peppa and George run after the 2 balls in the yard. Peppa picks up a ball and tosses it gently into the air. George rolls the other ball toward Peppa. The 2 siblings look at each other and laugh happily.
Peppa and the Sparkling Magic Wand. Peppa walks into the room, looking around curiously. A small wand sparkles on the chair. Peppa walks closer and touches the wand. The wand glows brighter. Peppa opens her eyes wide in surprise. Peppa picks up the wand and waves it gently. Magical bubbles appear. Peppa smiles happily. George runs over and looks at the magical circle. Peppa waves the wand again. Glowing magic circles appear. Peppa and George jump happily. The magic light slowly fades, and they both smile happily. Peppa's great ball chase. Peppa kicks the ball and it rolls down the hill.
Yahoo!
Peppa and George run after it, but the ball keeps rolling faster. The ball falls into a flower bush, and Peppa crawls in to look for it. George is delighted when he sees Peppa find the ball. The two of them continue playing football in the park. Peppa and the Flying Teddy Bear. Peppa hugs Teddy in her bedroom. George runs in with a bunch of balloons. Peppa looks at the balloons, then looks at Teddy, then gets an idea. Peppa lifts Teddy up and smiles happily. Peppa ties the balloons to Teddy. Peppa lets go to Teddy, starts to fly. Peppa and George are surprised and run after Teddy. Teddy floats up and gets stuck on a tree branch. Daddy Pig comes in, stands on a chair, and brings Teddy down.
2 hours later.
Peppa and George jump with joy. The whole family laughs happily. Peppa and George are inside the house. Peppa holds a sheet of blue paper. Carefully, she folds the paper into the shape of an airplane. Beep, beep, beep. Peppa makes the sound of a plane taking off. Peppa gives the paper plane to George. George smiles widely. He holds the plane and runs around the room. Whoosh, whoosh. George makes the sound of the plane flying in the air. Peppa claps her hands to cheer on her little brother. George runs near the window. He throws the plane. The plane flies out the window, loops around once, and lands on the green grass in the garden. Peppa and George watch in surprise. Peppa and George run outside into the garden together. They look everywhere for the paper plane. Hooray! Hooray! George shouts when he finds the plane on the lawn. They both pick it up and run back inside the house, laughing happily. Peppa Pig and the Sad Teddy Bear. The teddy bear is lying on Peppa's bed. Peppa plays with a Rubik's Cube. George runs past and accidentally bumps the teddy bear. The teddy bear falls onto the floor. Peppa turns around and sees the teddy bear. Peppa walks toward the teddy bear. Peppa bends down and picks up the teddy bear. Peppa gently brushes the dust off the teddy bear. Peppa hugs the teddy bear in her arms. George stands nearby and watches curiously. Peppa puts the teddy bear back on the bed. Peppa sits next to the teddy bear. Peppa sees George, and they both smile happily at each other. Teddy Bear Rescue. George tossed Teddy up to play, but oh no! Teddy didn't come back down. Instead, he got stuck high up on a tree branch. Peppa jumped as high as she could. George stretched his arms as far as he could, but Teddy stayed firmly on the branch. Just as the two were about to give up, a sudden gust of wind blew in. Teddy fell from the branch and landed neatly in George's arms. George hugged Teddy as if reuniting with a long-lost friend, while Peppa giggled under the tree. And so, The Teddy rescue mission ended. Not thanks to any plan, but thanks to the wind itself.